I'm Chloe.
And I'm Bez.
And this podcast is for graduate teachers in their first 5 years.
We share our own teaching stories as well as advice and ideas we wish we'd had as graduate teachers.
Sometimes funny, sometimes horrifying, but always true.
We want you to thrive and love teaching beyond the dreaded 5-year cliff. Hi, I'm Bez, maths and science teacher and also a soccer trainer with no previous soccer experience.
And I'm Chloe. I'm your maths and science extraordinaire and house leader who ran hula hoop competitions. For a fun fact, I cannot hula hoop. Okay, so Bez.
Yes, Chloe.
Today I want to start off with a game. Are you ready?
Always.
Okay, so I thought we could do Never Have I Ever Teacher's Edition.
This sounds juicy.
Might be. So, I'm going to start. Never have I ever planned a class and then been interrupted by like a fire drill.
What do I say if I have... Always?
Always, every time?
Never have I ever always. Should we do that?
Never have I ever always.
Always.
Always. I hated fire drills, did
Oh,
you?
they're the worst. It's chaotic. The whole day.
Chaos.
The whole day is thrown
Yeah.
off. It's not just your lesson.
Did you always know where to go?
No.
Your face is telling me no. Yeah. Follow the crowds, right? That's what I used
follow
to
the
do.
crowds.
Yeah. I remember one school I worked at, we had these weird parts and you had to take like your class to a particular part of the oval, but then every student had to move into their house groups.
Yes.
Which was so silly because it's
Yeah.
like you've already got them sorted and in a class, like just keep them in a class.
Actually, I changed my answer to never. I always knew it was on the basketball courts.
Okay, well done.
But I never knew, as you were saying, if you were meant to go into the house group or the class.
Where do I need to be?
And
Where
it
do
was
they need to
worse
be?
because I was a house leader, so people would ask me
And you're like,
and I would not have the answer.
did that mean you were like a warden?
No, thank goodness. I did not put my hand up for that.
Okay,
Maybe the confusion on my face
Fair.
put them
enough.
off.
Okay, have you got one?
Yes, I do.
Go.
Never have I ever planned a lesson and then forgotten it was school photos day.
Yeah, that one used to get me, but I can one-up you on that. Never have I ever always, because we've changed this
Yes.
now, forgotten that it was school photos day and totally not done my hair or looked nice and then taken a terrible school photo.
Never. I always made sure the photo was good.
Priorities.
At least if I'm stressed, then I'm going to look good.
Yeah, that's true. No, I was the person who just like had bags under their eyes and like it was definitely hair wash day. So I had like the slicked back ponytail, like what I'm sporting
Works.
today.
They never know. You just say it's meant to be.
Every time.
I planned it.
Every time.
Yeah.
Or like if you forget that it's school athletics day and you've come in casual, like your regular clothes instead of like your casual clothes
Oh,
or your
that was a
sports
classic.
clothes. I remember once I was like wearing these like heeled boots and like had to like help with like the relays or something. And I was like, I'm totally not dressed for this. It was the worst.
Just work it.
Worst day. And it was really cold too. And I didn't bring a
no.
puffer jacket or a raincoat or anything.
There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
And you're just freezing.
Yeah.
Okay. Never have I ever always realised that the content won't actually be finished about a month before the school year ends or before exams.
Oh, so do you mean like you realised a month before that you're not going to get everything done?
And then you're like, oh, I actually have about 2 months worth of content to get through.
Like, oh, I'm going to have to change my game plan and give my students a lot of homework
Yes.
or do some, lunchtime classes or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
And I think this is a lovely transition into what we're talking about today, which is all about how do you backwards map your year and come up with a sequence of learning so that you don't end up in situations like that where you're like, oh, I'm not going to finish the syllabus. I'm not going to finish the course. What
Not
do I
even
do?
before the school year ends. I remember the first few years when I taught, it would even be the first couple of assessments.
Yeah.
Especially like term 1 and term 2, when there were a lot of things happening like camp, NAPLAN, swimming sports. It'd be 2 weeks before an assessment. I would just be like, oh, but I have a month's worth of content to get through.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot in my first couple of years of teaching.
Term 1 can feel a little bit like, would you like to do some, teaching as a side with, your activities?
Oh my gosh. like there's literally, I dare say term one, there's almost something on every single week.
Yeah, there is. There's something on every week. And then if you're on a camp, then you're out for a week as well. So you got to factor that in too. I used to really stress around like, am I going to hit the deadlines for like when we had to release assessments? So
Yeah.
I know some schools do sort of progressive reporting, and there were certain dates it was like you must have something that you're progressively reporting on up, or it might be that you have like mid sort of term exams or progress reports, things like that. And it just felt stressful. And I remember my gauge was to ask teachers teaching the same subject and be like, where are you up to? Like, what's your class doing right now? And then it's like, oh, okay, I'm on track, or I'm a little bit behind, but so are they. Like, this is how we're going to plan to catch up.
Yeah. And that's
But
helpful.
It felt
isn't
touch and go, didn't it? It felt really touch and go. And you don't become good at it for a little while, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I suppose like our focus is then is like, well, how do you get good at it? How do you get to a point where you can account for all those interruptions? Because when you jump in, you kind of just think, yeah, the year's just going to go as it is, and I'm going to be able to get all of this done, no worries.
Yeah.
But we always plan to do more than you're probably going to be able to do.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that?
In terms of backwards mapping, when I first started, schools used to give me a general outline of a planner for a subject. And it would just be, for example, we'll go through 3 topics per week, and then week 2 would be like these next 3 topics. I did not find that helpful at all.
Why not?
Because it didn't account for example, swimming, sports or camp. It didn't account for how many lessons would actually be interrupted or that you're out for.
Yeah.
So,
And you know what? You kind of can't plan for that on a whole school level because everyone's timetable's so different.
that's correct.
So we might teach the same subject, but my class might get hit by 2 whole
Yes.
school things on the calendar, whereas yours might not.
And that
so
is
all
so
of a sudden,
frustrating.
I've got 2 periods less time than you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you have a general outline like that, they're the things that you can't see, right? So I actually had a very excellent mentor, and she created this pretty much like unit planner, and we can attach it in the show notes, footnotes as well. But basically, it would be week by week. It would have every single lesson and what topic we would go through for each lesson. So say, for example, week 1, I always have biology
Okay.
on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Oh,
It
so
would
did it
go-
have lesson 1, 2 and 3?
No, so it would be week. So
Yeah.
on the left-hand side, it would have week 1, week 2, week 3. In the columns, it would say Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or when I
Okay.
have those lessons. And then it would outline every single lesson, what topic I'm supposed to go through. And if there's, for example, school photos, it would indicate school photos. So I know to plan half a lesson.
Did she do that for everyone?
Well, she shared it with me. She saved my life.
So she must have like mapped it to the whole school calendar then.
Correct. She mapped it, with a whole school calendar, and it would have in there when we were supposed to have assessments. And this is how you can backwards map. You put in on that lesson,
What a legend.
when that assessment is. So, for example, if it's week 7, lesson 3,
Okay.
and then you just fill in every single lesson, and then you can see, oh, crap, I won't have time for any revision. So can I squish 2 topics together, or do I need to give them extra homework in week 3 to make sure that they're up to date?
Yeah.
It was just a very great way to visualize the entire term,
Yeah.
but then also what's happening in every single lesson as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So ever since she showed me that, I have never gone back
Yeah.
on planning like that.
Yeah, I eventually used to do something like that, but I was never so good that I could do it a whole year in advance. And I don't know if that's just because my brain doesn't operate that way. I kind of work on a term by term basis, but then I also kind of like to fly on the edge of my seat and do things week by week as well.
Yeah.
Because you do need to be flexible.
Yeah.
Like teaching is not like completely set. It is fluid.
Yeah.
And you need to be flexible because things might change. Your class might not understand one topic and you might need to spend a
of
bit more
course.
time on it.
Yeah.
Or you might blitz through one lesson and then you're ready to jump ahead. And every now and again, maybe there was something that came up that wasn't on the whole school calendar at the start of the year but got planned later on. So things do sort of happen out of the blue. For our listeners, I just want to highlight that if things go wrong, it is okay. And I've been in instances myself where I found myself in a bit of a pickle with situations like this where things weren't going to be done in time. And if we didn't voice those concerns to somebody in the school or try to find a solution, then, we could have been in a little bit of hot water.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I have an example with my senior biology class where we had a compulsory assessment that they had to do. And the type of assessment that it was a research task. And it needed to be done over a series of different lessons. And then the students did a write-up and that they had to do it in class so that we could authenticate their work and they submit that as their piece. So we tallied up how many lessons in our, as a biology team we needed, and I think we needed about 5 or 6 periods to do this. But there was something that popped up on the calendar that came in late that impacted us. And there was 3 senior biology classes, and one of those classes, I think it was my class, wasn't going to finish in time. We were going to be a period short, which wouldn't be fair to the students if we gave them 1 period less than their peers because they're in their senior years, and if we're putting them at a disadvantage, that's just not okay. So we had to go and speak to our deputy principal about this actually, because we had mapped this out over this period of 2 weeks that was completely set for senior assessments. So all seniors were doing assessments across this 2-week period, which meant it was generally a blackout period for excursions and things. But this class did get impacted by something. So anyway, it was good that I flagged it to my head of department and was like, hey, actually, I don't think I'm going to finish in time. This is what's happened. We went and spoke to the deputy. And instead of it becoming a big issue and oh no, what have you done kind of thing, it was okay, well, let's just adjust the schedule and push things a little bit so that we can fit this in and we can extend the assessment deadline for your class for this date. So it all worked out in the end. I think people understand that we need to be flexible, but I think you just got to be really open with your communication. If you're willing to work with people, they're going to be willing to work with you.
Yeah.
You just got to give people as much time as you can in advance.
Yeah.
You got to plan ahead. If I went to her the day of and I was like, oh no, my class has run out of time, what do I do? It's going to be much more difficult to find a solution.
Yeah. And I think just with the context of schools, everyone is aware that there's always interruptions or changes. So everyone is really used to being flexible, but as you're saying, you just have to clearly communicate that.
Yeah, and look,
provide people with enough time.
I felt terrible because I felt oh no, I stuffed up. I should have had vision of this. I should have realised this sooner. But it could have happened to anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's just part of school life, isn't it?
Exactly.
You pivot.
Yep. Oh, it's all about pivoting. Just looping back to the unit or the sequence planner, I do want to clarify we did not map out the entire year. Okay. So the way that we actually did it was on a Google Doc or a Word document. And the very first heading we had on top of there in red, in bold, was please consistently refer back to this document as it's a live changing document.
Okay.
And we shared that with students. And, whenever we were talking about assessments or what was coming up in the next lesson, we would project that on the board.
Yeah.
Just so that you can get students
Planning
just so that
for
you could get students knowing where to look and what document they need to look at.
In other words, do not print this document.
Yes. But also when students ask when an assessment is, getting them to go back to the planner and empowering them to be independent and find out when that assessment actually is. And we would actually only plan out each lesson for term by term.
Okay.
So if it was term 1, we'd only have all of term 1 set up.
And then if you needed to adjust as you go, you could, because you wouldn't have to then adjust a full year.
That's correct. Yeah. And then term 2, term 3, term 4, we would put all the assessment dates in, but then there would be nothing on that.
Fantastic. Des, when it comes to school planning around sequencing of lessons and things, I know schools can do that in a myriad of different ways. And there might be some schools that just go with like a general curriculum planner. Other schools might go with like a term planner that they also give to their students. And then others might even mandate that it has to be broken down week by week. I know student weekly planners can be very common in schools now. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, okay, what are some of these different systems that you've maybe seen in schools or that maybe we've experienced? And then how can you utilise those with your own planning preferences to sort of map your own year? So for example, the first school that I worked in was very big on, okay, for every single subject, 7 to 12 across the school, there must be a student weekly planner along with curriculum documents for the term. So teachers would use these weekly planners and we'd know exactly what we should be teaching in what week with what assessments and when they were planned for, and then students would also get a copy. Now, you kind of flagged earlier that things don't always go that way. I know my own experience has been the same, but I do think that those rough plans are helpful. Did you find that you came across lots of weekly planners or did your schools use something different?
That's a really great question. I think it depends on what the school mandates, and it's also important to keep in mind that personal preference is also really different as well. So like the week by week, lesson by lesson planner, that worked really well.
Did your schools do that?
No, that was not required. So we only did that for biology. We also did it for...
So was that like a department-based decision for a specific subject?
Yeah, like we just did it out of personal preference. So we also did it for the junior science classes that we taught. But what was mandated from my first school was just an overview of, you know, the year and that where the assessments were. That was pretty much what was mandated. And then obviously the topics that would go through.
Which did you find were most helpful?
Definitely the week by week, lesson by lesson.
Yeah.
Just because it accounted for interruptions, and that's just the way that my brain sort of works. I need to see.
And it sounds like your first school actually didn't have that. Like you just said, like that first school, you kind of had those term ones and you only had those week by weeks for a couple of subjects.
Yeah.
I was in a situation where the first school I ever worked in, I was just straight given those weekly planners from the get-go.
Really?
Yeah, and
That's
I found them
different.
super helpful because I kind of like, oh, yep, I should be roughly up to here by now. Like it kind of gave me like a guide or a reference of, okay, what I should be working to and am I sort of within the limits of falling too far behind or needing to catch up. Without that, how did you manage?
Without
without the week by week stuff?
Oh, I didn't manage. Like I had the overall yearly planner that was given to the school as a template. So we always did that. But then I would also make an additional planner that was for my reference and I would share with the students as well. Because that's just how my brain worked. And that was helpful. But like I said, it's personal preference. So the last school that I was at, that week by week, lesson by lesson plan worked really well for me, but the other psych teacher used a different planner because it was just too detailed and a lot of effort to keep. Well, not rigid, I guess, because you could also change it, but just more. She sort of preferred like a broader outline week by week rather than lesson by lesson.
Was she a more experienced teacher at the time?
Yeah, she was.
Interesting. Yeah. Did you chat to her about where she was up to versus where you were up to? Did you collaborate on like what's next?
Yeah, all the time. I think it's one of the most important things, you know. Hopefully you're not teaching a subject by yourself because that can be quite a lot in the first few years.
It does happen though.
It does, yes, no, absolutely. But we met weekly pretty much and would just touch base about, okay, where are you up to the next 3 lessons, for example? Are we on track for the assessment and what changes had to be made as well? So that like collaboration was so important because you could bounce ideas off like, you know, what worked for your class, what changes had to be made to meet that assessment in time.
I want to come back to that idea of like, okay, what if I am the only teacher who's teaching this subject and I don't have anyone to bounce off? There might be listeners, you might be in that position. And for those people, I want to reiterate that there might still be people in your school community that maybe have taught this before, in which case they probably have some of this documentation. And the fabulous thing about teaching is that it is such a collegial job. Like, it is the kind of job where people are willing to collaborate and share their tips, and people love talking about teaching, which is kind of the reason we're doing this podcast. But there's probably someone in your school community who's willing to help.
Yeah.
And if there isn't, then get involved and linked in with some associations, or reach out to schools in your area and see if you can develop a network.
Even on Facebook, there's a lot of teacher groups, for example, that are subject specific.
Yep.
And when I taught psychology for the first time, that was my lifesaver. As you were saying, teachers love to share.
Yeah.
You know, they really collaborate, and people would share their assessments, their lesson plans, their activities, their worksheets. Like, the things that teachers would share on there were absolutely amazing, where if you were teaching for the first time and you were alone, you would have enough there, you know, like a backbone to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond just knowing what sequence should I do things in and am I on track. It's also about, okay, well, if I want to cover this, what's the most effective way to cover it in this time frame? What are some effective activities for me to use? What are some activities that maybe aren't so effective? People are willing to share those stories.
Yeah.
And I know they're great staff room conversations and they're great coffee conversations during your free periods if your times match up. But those other groups online, or if you develop those networks and go to meet people in person, they're great places to have those
and
chats
conferences.
too. Love
as well.
a conference.
Conferences were great, and you could network.
Sucker for a conference.
And, you know, people would pass on those groups or their emails or their activities. So conferences, if you can go to one in person or virtually, they're a really great way to connect.
Yep. Join those associations. Go to those conferences. You get a lot of free material there, which is fab.
And we love free things.
Oh, don't we?
Chloe, what's your takeaway from today?
My takeaway. Okay. I guess if I was to go back in time, I would be less stressed about staying exactly to my school's weekly plans.
Yes, very important.
Less stressed, bit more flexible, okay with being a little bit behind, okay with being a little bit ahead, and just knowing that there's likely going to be somebody else who's in the same position as what I'm in, and there's a way forward. And they probably have some tips and tricks for me, so I should go chat to them.
That's a good one.
Yeah. What's yours?
I reckon mine would be the same. Be flexible and don't freak out if interruptions happened, especially if they're unplanned. They're bound to happen.
Just be easy-breezy.
Yeah, I always freaked out. In the end, it works out. And like you said, chat with your colleagues, network, you know, most likely people on the same boat.
And if there's a fire drill, go to the basketball court or just follow the crowd.
Just follow the crowd. Make sure you know if it's classes or mental roofs. Anyway, so going on a rant.
Well, that's all we've got time for today, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
If you liked this podcast, please leave us a review. Please follow. If you found it helpful or think of someone who might find this helpful, please share it with them.
Be collegial.